Hi everybody, you're listening to Comics and History, episode number 131, part 3, Spotlight on the Hal Jordan Spectre, concluded. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Ragate, and class is back from recess one last time as we conclude our look at the Hal Jordan Spectre. Before I get looking at two storylines which led into the ultimate end of Hal Jordan's time as the host of the Spectre, I just want to talk for a couple minutes about one last story which stands out in my memory. It's an issue of DC First from 2002 featuring Green Lantern's Alan Scott and Hal Jordan. And I spoke about this story in much greater detail during my Spotlight series on Alan Scott, specifically in the pre-Flashpoint era. But I just want to recall that in the end of that story, Alan in the present day reflects on the fact that he's moved on and taken the name Sentinel, while Kal Rayner is the last Green Lantern in the universe, while Hal Jordan is currently on a path towards redemption in his duties as the host of the Spectre. And really nice retelling, a classic Silver Age Green Lantern story. But something that irked me in this retelling was the scene near the end of the main story in which a young Hal Jordan briefly becomes imbued with the power of the central power battery, and he becomes this translucent green energy being, and he's all knowing, all powerful, and he talks about how he can see everything, and he can see all of the wrongs that have been done, and he feels that he wants to use the power to fix all of these injustices. And it's up to Alan Scott to talk Hal down, help him find his sense of humanity again. But what bothered me is that this and other stories that were being published around this time went out of their way to argue that even from his first days as a Green Lantern, Hal Jordan always had this fixation with fixing things that he saw as being wrong. And I mean, I can see these stories for what they really were. They were an attempt by DC Brain Trust to say to fans who weren't pleased with Hal's sudden villainous turn in Emerald Twilight that no, Emerald Twilight wasn't really a rushed job. This was always a part of Hal Jordan's character, and now that was just being brought to the fore here. And a lot of fans, including myself, weren't buying that. And I know this may sound more like a Hal Jordan Spotlight episode here, but because the Spectre was literally bound to Hal Jordan during this time, it is important that I mention this because it's the idea of Hal wanting to fix things up comes up again during Green Lantern Rebirth. So now, before we get looking at Identity Crisis and an important story arc in JSA, I also want to point out one story. It was a two-part story written by James DeMatteis titled JLA Spectre Soul War. And in this story, an alien entity known as the Trans has hijacked the minds of the Earth's most powerful psychics in order to create this horrific realm. And the JLA, who by this point recognize Hal as the Spectre, make the uneasy decision to merge with Hal and the Spectre to form an Uber Spectre in order to take on the Trans. And much like what happened near the end of Final Night, Hal makes a heroic sacrifice once more as he sacrifices his existence to defeat the Trans and to save the JLA. And in the end, it's the power of the mind of one particular psychic who has been freed from the trance, who's able to revive the Spectre. And there's this really nice concluding splash page in which Batman extends his hand in friendship to the Spectre, and he says, "Welcome back, Hal." And Hal is afforded the chance, in his guise as the Spectre, to smile. And it's really interesting here in that Batman, for a brief time, has a change of heart. The words "Welcome back, Hal" are significant in that prior to the story, and even in stories after Green Lantern Rebirth, right up till the time of Infinite Crisis, Batman insisted on referring to Hal as Jordan. And one could imagine that there was a fair amount of bile and contempt in Batman's voice as he said Jordan. Whereas all of the other heroes had forgiven Hal or were willing to give him that second chance in his duties as the Spectre, Batman just could not let go of his feelings of hostility towards Jordan, his anger that Jordan, who had committed all of these unspeakable crimes during Emerald Twilight and Zero Hour, would be given a second chance to wield such great power. Now, this would be a very short-lived change of heart on Batman's plan, and we're going to look now at Identity Crisis by Brad Meltzer and Rags Morales. Identity Crisis is remembered as more of a murder mystery centered around the death of Sue Dibney, the death of Robin's father, Jack Drake. It's remembered more as a story which sets up Superman's transition to, one fellow podcaster has said it, a reluctant leader. It certainly goes a fair ways in explaining why Batman became such a neurotic, paranoid character going into Identity Crisis. But I would say that Identity Crisis is also significant in how it justifies Batman's feelings of anger and hostility towards Hal Jordan. And now, spoilers for Identity Crisis. In Identity Crisis, Sue Dibney is murdered. It's also revealed that years before, she was raped by Dr. Light, and that in retribution for his horrific crime against one of their own, a group of Justice Leaguers who go on to become known as a League within the League decide right then and there in the JLA satellite to mind wipe Dr. Light, basically lobotomize him and turn him into a lower level villain who can't even take on the Teen Titans. And Batman comes upon this group of Leaguers supporting Zatanna and mind wiping and altering Dr. Light's mind, and he becomes quite angry and he tries to stop them, only to be pinned down and mind wiped himself. And over the course of Identity Crisis, it is revealed that the mind wiping has a limited shelf life, and Dr. Light's more sinister, more dangerous persona returns, and it is implied that Batman's suppressed memories will return in time. And indeed, that really is what plays out following Identity Crisis, as Batman gets those lost 10 minutes and change of his life back. But it also goes away in explaining why in previous stories like Tower of Babel, Batman kept secret files on all of the Leaguers and held things that he knew would act as things that could take down the Leaguers in a crisis. It also explains why he created the Brother Eye satellite as a way of keeping tabs on all of the world's metahumans and other costumed crime fighters. But now, how does all of this pertain to Hal Jordan and Batman's resentment of Hal Jordan? Well, in my mind, Batman, as he gets those last 10 minutes back, starts to reason why different Leaguers voted in favor of or against the practice of mind wiping. And this was a practice which was revealed the League within the League carried out on multiple occasions. But in terms of what happened to him, Batman probably reasons that Green Arrow and Black Canary were against the mind wiping and were outvoted. He probably reasons that Hawkman Carter Hall is a product of an earlier time and would naturally be in favor of mind wiping. Barry Allen, Batman probably reasoned, was the swing vote in favor of the mind wiping because Barry was still in mourning for his wife who had been murdered by the Reverse Flash. But when it came to Hal, it seems that Batman held an even higher degree of grievance against Hal. And he probably reasoned that Hal voted in favor of mind wiping Dr. Light and later in favor of mind wiping Dark Knight. And so you may think, well, why? Why resent Hal above all of the rest? And I think it's because Batman actually looks at Hal as the one who he can relate to the most on the Justice League. And I can't believe that I'm going to do this, but I'm actually going to use a New 52 era story to justify my feeling. Going back to the first arc of the New 52 Justice League storyline, near the climax of the story, Darkseid's forces are ransacking Earth Zero, and they take Superman away. Green Lantern is injured. The other members of the team that will come to be known as the Justice League are all down. And it's Batman who goes to Hal and says, hey, look, I've got to get on the ship. I've got to save Superman because he's the one who can help bring everything crashing down for Darkseid and these parademons. And so while I'm away, Hal, you're going to have to step up and lead the rest of the heroes. And Hal looks at Batman and says, well, why me? And Batman says, because I see something in common between us. These other heroes, they have these great powers and they're always on. But you and I, if we take away our weapons, we're perfectly regular human beings. We have no powers. So I see something of you in me. And so I tie that in with Identity Crisis and it being sometime later and Batman and Hal having formed this friendship, only for Batman to realize that in this moment, the one guy who Batman feels he can relate most to has let him down. And so that helps to explain why for this whole time Batman has such anger towards Hal and refuses to even think back positively on Hal's time before he even became parallax.